Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of Voice for Radio. So today, we are continuing our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game by having a gander at Great Encounters. Now, this was a very good set. I told you we were starting a run of phenomenal sets. This introduced one of the very, very best Pokemon we've ever seen. It introduced a world-winning deck. Or kind of, we'll get there. And I must apologise, of course, last week we did take a week off from the complete history, unless you're binging these at some point in the future, and I really hope people do, because these videos take ages, but I'm really proud of them, and I do think we're doing a pretty good job of telling the story of the Pokemon trading card game. Although, as always, spam that like button to let me know you'd like more in the future, would ya? That would be lovely. So, Great Encounters then. It was released in English on the 13th of February 2008. And it didn't really get a Japanese release. You see, we ended up having a weird release schedule because of movies like Giratina and the Sky's Bouquet Shaman. Because Japan delayed their set to coincide with that movie, which led them to have a 6-month gap between sets, which the Pokemon Company International outside of Japan, they didn't want to do that. So we ended up having this weird set, and Japan's Diamond and Pearl 4 set ended up being kind of half in here and half in Majestic Dawn, which is a next set, which we'll get to, another phenomenal set. And then we had all of those cards like your Dialga, Palkia, and Darkrai cards, which were held back that should have been in Secret Wonders, that ended up being put in here, because the Darkrai movie was now out in this part of the world. So we had this weird situation where we had cards being essentially delayed in Japan to coincide with a movie, which we didn't get, but then we got some cards which had previously been delayed for a movie over here, which we did get, and basically these set lists were being dictated by movies and having these new legendary and mythical Pokemon that needed to make their debut in the card game to coincide with the movie where they were featured. Yeah, it was a little bit confusing. Now, we did get our debuts of Darkrai and Cresselia in this particular set, which was very, very cool. And like I said, we did get those Dialga and Palkia, including the level X's, which should have been in Secret Wonders, which ended up being popped in over here. And I was delighted because the pre-release promo for this particular set was Porygon 2, and Porygon 2 is awesome. Now, if you're looking for the most expensive cards in the set, it was actually Palkia and Dialga, the level X's. They're generally looking about $40 to $50. Given that the Palkia was a very, very playable card, we would probably give the edge to that one in terms of actually being a really playable card, which kind of does pump up the value a little bit. Now, in terms of the level X's in the sets, it's always fun to run through all of the chase cards. We did literally just get the legendaries. So we got a new Dialga and a new Palkia. Like I say, they were supposed to be in Secret Wonders. They got held back. And then we got ourselves Darkrai and Cresselia. Although again, Darkrai was also held back from the previous set. So Cresselia is actually the only one that should have debuted in this set, if that makes any real amount of sense. And I do need to just quickly shout out Dialga Level X's Poker Power, which didn't really see a huge amount of play, but it had the Poker Power time skip, which let you have your opponent flip 2 coins, and if both of them were heads, your turn ended, but if both of them were tails, your opponent drew a card, and then their turn ended next turn. So they would essentially have a draw card, and that was their entire turn. Way too risky to actually use properly, but I certainly did, and I know a bunch of others did play around with this just in fun games. And while we're talking weird cards that didn't really see play but looked really cool on the face of it, shout out to Darkrai Level X, because it had an attack whereby the defending Pokemon was asleep, and they had to flip 2 coins between turns and flip double heads to wake up. But if they flipped double tails, the defending Pokemon actually got KO'd. So they were as likely to get automatically KO'd as they were to wake up. It's one of those attacks that I always expected to be good and see play and end up winning, and there were some rogue decks around here or there, but it never really ended up being particularly good. Now, thematically, in terms of theme decks, we did get 3, and they were very, very cool. One had Dialga, one had Palkia, and one had Darkrai. So, Eternal Time was the Dialga theme deck. You got yourself a Dialga Coin, a Holo Dialga, which was exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set. And then you got yourself a Rare Primeape and a non-holo Porygon Z, which again was exclusive to the deck. Porygon Z was a holo in the set proper. We then had Infinite Space, which was the Palkia theme deck. You got yourself a holo version of Palkia, which was exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set proper. And then you got rare versions of both Exploud and Slowking. And then Endless Night was the Darkrai theme deck, which annoyingly didn't give you a Darkrai coin, which was very upsetting. That makes me a little bit sad. But you did get yourself a holo Darkrai, which was not exclusive to the deck. It was a holo in the set properly. And non-holos of Houndoom and Beedrill, both of which were just non-holos in the set proper. Though the Beedrill was awesome. But certainly in terms of Sizzle, the Darkrai theme deck, it did get a little bit hard done by, I think is probably fair to say. Now, as we move on to the best cards, there really is only one place to start. It is Claydol. And Claydol wasn't the best card in this set, though obviously it was. Claydol was one of the very, very best cards we ever got in any set ever. You see, Claydol had the Poké Power Cosmic Power. Once during your turn, you got to choose up to 2 cards in your hand, you put them on the bottom of your deck, and then drew until you had 6 cards in your hand. No, putting 0 cards on the bottom of your deck didn't count, no matter how many people tried to convince me 0's a number up to 2. No, it's not. But Claydol was a phenomenal card, and it was one of the key reasons the Diamond and Pearl era of the Pokemon TCG was so gosh darn consistent. Like teching in a 1-0-1 line of a Pokemon with 1 rare candy consistent. Because you could basically get rid of cards you didn't need, while also drawing... I mean, if you had 1 card in hand, you could put it on bottom of your deck and draw 6. And you could have multiple Claydol on your bench, all doing this at the same time. Claydol came to define the format because everybody basically played Claydol because it was just too gosh darn good in terms of consistency. And then, of course, you had all of these cards coming around like Garchomp C Level X, and Garchomp C Level X could hit the bench, and one of the best things about hitting the bench for 80 was you could get a 1-hit KO on a Claydol. And let's be clear, that was one of the best things about Garchomp, was the automatic 1-hit KO on a Claydol. It was just... It is hard, if you weren't playing back in the day, it is hard for me to overstate quite how good and game-defining Claydol was, and quite how ridiculous it was as a draw engine. But if you weren't playing back then, try and get some old decks together with your friends, because the Diamond and Pearl decks tend to be quite cheap to put together. And play a few games, and you will understand quite how ridiculous Claydol was as a draw engine. But if we want to get to Pokemon that actually attack, Beedrill won Worlds. Now, to be fair, we did need the Beedrill from Rising Rivals that let you kind of search and set up. That was a very important part of the deck, but this was the main attacker in a deck that won the World Championships. For a single Grass Energy, you did 30 damage for each Beedrill you had in play. So in theory, you've got 4 Beedrill in play, you do 120 for a single Grass Energy, which at the time was a good amount of damage. It got a lot of key KOs. But because of the other Beedrill searching stuff out, you just had the speed. And it really was as simple as that. This became a phenomenally speedy deck, and Steven Silvestro actually won the World Championships using Beedrill. That was the year that the French players took Gyarados Championships, so... Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, Gyarados shouldn't have won Worlds. This should have won Worlds, because it totally... And what it did was it prevented all effective attacks other than damage done to the Pokemon to which Unknown G was attached. And really, this became super hyper relevant because of Machamp. Machamp pretty much single-handedly turned this into a good card. Because you see, Machamp had an attack that for a single energy, and stage 2s were much easier to get in play back then. For a single energy, it got an automatic straight one-hit KO on a basic Pokemon. Oh, that wasn't good, and there were lots of really good basic Pokemon decks around at the time. And you basically had to play Unknown G just to deal with Machamp. Unknown G was a really, really, really good card. Now, they were the absolute top of the range cards in the set, but we also had Palkia Level X. Now, Palkia Level X had the really good Poké Power restructure, and it basically said that you could make your opponent gust one of your bench active, and then you would gust one of your opponent's bench active, i.e. you would choose one of their bench to come into the active, and they would choose one of yours. And I know that they choose yours as much as you choose theirs, but there were a bunch of decks that really, really could take advantage of this. Flygon Level X decks were very, very good, because that allowed you to drop a damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon between turns. And what you really wanted to do was just drag a Pokemon in the active and get it stuck there. And this did a really good job of doing that. Obviously, you would need to make sure you had enough switching cards, free retreaters, etc., like Flygon, that this wouldn't be a huge issue for you. But it was also really good in these AMU decks. Now, we're not at AMU decks yet, that is Azelf, Mesprit, Uxie. But it is worth pointing out that we had the Mesprit that we've already looked at from Mysterious Treasures, and that had the Pokebody Upper Material. If you have Uxie and Azelf in play, the retreat cost for each Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, both yours and your opponent's, is 0. So Palkia Level X was amazing in AMU decks, because everything your opponent could basically gust active had free retreat, and that helped a lot. Really, really hurt their options, while you could be dragging up whatever you wanted to go ahead and attack. Also worth pointing out, when we talk about the Flygon dropping damage, there was also the Trapinch, and we did mention Trapinch previously. It's the one from Secret Wonders. For a single fighting energy, you did 10 damage, and it stopped them retreating during your opponent's next turn. So not only could you grab them active with Palkia, but you would be able to use the card Memory Berry to copy the attack on Trapinch, and then you could basically trap them in the active while all of your opponent's Pokemon just took damage after damage from Flygon's ability. It was a very, very cool combo, although admittedly that deck needed some cards from later sets before it would really come around. Now, the Pachirisu from this set was kind of cool. It really was just as a setup. For one colorless energy, it had Call for Family, and we've seen a million Call for Family Pokemon in the history of the game, but this one, for one colorless energy, searched for 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench, and generally Call for Family gets you 2. So being able to get 3 here in decks that really needed to set up and get your basics quickly, this was a really good option. Now, I have previously mentioned Porygon 2, it was the pre-release promo, and it was a very nice card indeed, because it's got the Poké Power download. Once during your turn, you may discard a supporter card from your hand and use the effect of that card as the effect of this power. It was basically a stage 1 Pokemon that let you play an extra supporter. I mean, discarding a supporter from your hand and using the effect as the effect of this Poké Power is just a fancy way of saying play a second supporter from your hand. Nice. That's really quite useful. And it wasn't necessarily a real powerhouse card, but there was a bit of love given to Cresselia Level X. Now, Cresselia Level X did actually have a really nice ability, or Poké Power, that once during your turn let you move 1 damage counter from either player's Pokemon to another Pokemon. So you could move their damage around to KO them, or you could move damage from you to them, which was always a fun one. And it wasn't an absolute powerhouse, but it did see play in a few decks. And we should probably mention the Cresselia here, because this kind of had, if you discarded 2 cards, you drew 4. And this was primarily played in Gyarados decks. We'll get to Gyarados when we get to Stormfront, but for 0 energy, you did 30 damage for each Magikarp in your discard pile. So you needed to get Magikarp in your discard, so you would search them out, and then Felicity would allow you to drop them in the discard, and Felicity really was an absolutely huge card in Gyarados specifically. And then the other trainer from here that really did see a bunch of play and was really very good was Moonlight Stadium. And of course, we've got both Cresselia and Darkrai on the artwork there, very fitting given what the set was. And it just reduced the retreat cost of each Psychic and Darkness Pokemon to 0. It gave free retreat to Darkness and Psychic Pokemon. So clearly, if you were playing Darkness or Psychic Pokemon, this was one you would have to take quite seriously. Now, in terms of the top decks here, honestly, we're only looking at one. Palkia Level X did really help to make Flygon decks and AMU decks way better. But the fact of the matter is, we weren't there yet. You can't really honestly tell me that they are decks that came around in Great Encounters. There was really one deck that did, and it's Beedrill. And even then, that's not a particularly fair thing to say, because there were two key cards that Beedrill needed that came around in Rising Rivals, and you could argue that Beedrill is actually a Rising Rivals deck, and honestly, when we get round to Rising Rivals, Beedrill will be one of the decks we talk about. Now, I've already mentioned that this Beedrill for a single energy did 120 for each Beedrill you've got in play, but the Beedrill from Rising Rivals had the Pokepower Flutter Wings, which let you search your deck for a grass Pokemon, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. So essentially, as soon as you ended up getting one Beedrill into play, you could just start really swarming Beedrill, and it honestly made such a huge difference. Now, as I've said, this did win the 2009 World Championships, piloted by Steven Silvestro, and it really was a Beedrill deck. The other thing we did see, and we did actually play enough energy to attack with this, we did actually see Luxray GL Level X. And Beedrill wasn't exactly a novel deck in that regard, because it was a pretty obvious combo. But what Steven did that not necessarily everybody did was play Luxray Level X. Now this was, again, this could rightly be counted as one of the best cards ever. The Pokepower Bright Look, when you level X, and remember you can only level X when you're in the active, allows you to drag one of your bench Pokemon active, one of your opponent's bench, and just drag it straight into the active. Just drag it from the bench right into the active. That's gusting. And it's got free retreat, which is huge. And 60 damage. Not bad for 2 energy. And it lets you hit lightning weakness. You did have to do 30 to one of your own Pokemon, but usually you can deal with that. It's not perfect, but it's certainly not the end of the world. It is worth noting at the time that Rare Candy was a way better card, because Rare Candy allowed you to evolve the turn you played a Pokemon. So you could play a Weedle and then immediately evolve straight up into a Beedrill without having to wait a turn like you have to nowadays. Believe me, that made a rather ridiculous difference, if I'm honest with you. that was pretty gosh darn huge. And we did also see that the deck played Broken Time Space, which was a stadium that let you evolve your Pokemon whenever you gosh darn well felt like it. And when you've got 2 different ways to evolve up as fast as you like, and you've got a way to search as soon as you start getting your evolutions rolling, you can see how getting 4 Stage 2s in 2009 was not the same as getting 4 Stage 2s in 2020. Obviously, there was a fairly fat Claydol line here as well. That should be expected because of the whole, consistency thing. And we did see 4 copies of Night Maintenance. Now, that's weird, because generally it's a recovery card, right? You generally don't see a full 4 copies of Night Maintenance, but bearing in mind, this was a deck that relied on having your Beedrill. So yeah, we really did need 4 copies of Night Maintenance to get your Pokemon and basic energy back. And the good news is I have actually done a full video about this Beedrill deck winning the World Championships, so I will make sure to pop a link to that one in the description so you can go and check that one out at your leisure. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Great encounters, and it was great encounters. We saw the debut of Darkrai and Cresselia. We saw a world-winning deck coming around. We saw one of the best Pokemon we've ever had, and a bunch of other cool stuff beside. This was a very, very nice set indeed. But now it's over to you guys. I'm going to obviously spam the like button. You know that by now. But I want to know what you thought about this set if you were playing back then. If you weren't playing back then, I would like to know what you think now that you've seen this card now. So let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.